We're at our last session now, and a great pleasure to welcome Lawrence Tallon. Lawrence has recently taken over as Chief Executive at the MHRA. Previously, Lawrence was Deputy Chief Executive at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, responsible for change programs, innovation, etc. And Lawrence has very kindly agreed to do this, despite the fact that he's had a very busy day. He's been in Leeds with the Secretary of State and has rushed down just to give you a talk and so on. So, Lawrence, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Munir. The sound okay? I can see people are refreshing their glasses, so I'll give you perhaps a minute to get settled before I begin. But thank you very much, Munir, for inviting me. Thank you, colleagues, for staying. I know this has been the end of a long and very detailed day of deliberations, so many of you will be wanting to get off to other things. But thank you for staying to hear what I have to say. And as Munir said, I'm the recently appointed Chief Executive of the MHRA. And I have to say that the term hard act to follow is often overused, but I do think I can genuinely claim I have a hard act to follow. I saw June Rain here a minute ago. I've lost her in my line of sight now, but that really, truly is a hard act to follow, and a real honour for me to take over from someone who's so well regarded in the sector. Now, I haven't been a regulator by career, so you'll have to forgive me. I don't know all the number codes of all the regulations if you're going to ask me those questions. Actually, I've spent the majority of my career leading frontline health services in academic medical centres, mainly in the UK and sometime overseas as well. So I guess I see this through the lens of an innovator in public services, and that's been my main interaction with regulation. And I'm going to set out for you in a few slides today how I see the challenges and the opportunities, the context in which we're working in health, life sciences and the economy of the UK, and what I think should be the role of risk proportionate trusted regulation as a crucial part within that. And my title is significant, I think: safety, access and innovation. And that's very much how I see the role of trusted regulation, all of those three, not just one. And my overall theme will be one of hope for a better future. And I hope that you'll see as we go through that theme. But I am going to warn you, I'm going to set up the problem statement before I get into the hope. So you have to bear with me, if you will. So I'm going to talk a bit about healthcare, the state of healthcare, and depending on where you put the accent in that phrase, the state of healthcare, it can be quite depressing at the moment. I'm then going to talk briefly about the economy. It's still pretty bleak at that point, but then we get on to the hopeful stuff around science and technology and, crucially, the role of an enabling risk-proportionate regulator. So, clearly, we have a growing burden of disease. I won't go on about this at length because you all know the burden of disease that we see across most developed countries and slightly differently, but also in developing countries. But we know that the pressure from not just aging, but multiple morbidity, long-term conditions, and many, many people living many more years in ill health is putting huge pressure on health services in this country and many others. And a fairly recent study showed that across all of the OECD countries for the last 5 decades, on average, the costs of meeting healthcare demand has grown 2 percentage points above GDP growth across all of those countries. So in other words, health is consuming a greater and greater proportion of national wealth reliably and predictably across developed countries. That is driven, of course, by many modifiable risk factors, particularly obesity, causing things like heart disease, diabetes, and also contributing to cancer. We also understand, although the burden may be smaller in total terms, we understand more than we ever have about complex rare disease and how to manage them. And of course, many of these rare diseases, and I'm sure this will have been a theme through today, have relatively poor treatment options, or at least have had relatively poor treatment options until now. The mic's going in and out, I think, a bit. Okay, thanks. And as well as rising demand, we of course have limitations in our supply, because predominantly we meet this demand through human beings and have done historically and continue to today. And a projection in this country from the Health Foundation quite recently said that if we continue to try and provide healthcare in the way we are today, we would need another 500,000 people in the NHS by the end of 2030. Those people are not out there. And if they were, we couldn't afford them. And we certainly can't get them from other countries because the same problem exists across the whole of the world, and particularly in the global south, where those shortages of workforce numbers are far greater. And this is illustrative of what's going on in this country. There's a lot going on in this slide, so I'll briefly explain it. The bars show total spending on the NHS over the last two and a half decades. And what you see, of course, was a surge in spending in the 2000s when the economy was growing really strongly, which slowed off but continued to grow more slowly after the world financial crisis. The sort of dark but highlighted bar through the middle shows waiting times, which actually, if I could extrapolate that out, if I had the data, had come down dramatically and then started gradually to creep up. And the sort of royal blue line is the key one here, which is public satisfaction with the health service. So the last time the NHS was in what you might call serial decline at the end of the 90s, public satisfaction with the health service was just 33%. It rose to 70% by the end of that injection of money. And that, I think, is a fundamental transformation in the experience of patients and the public. And actually, it held reasonably steady even during the austerity years because of the capacity that had been built up in those times of spending. And it was still 60% at 2019. And then COVID happened. And that's what happened. Waiting times went through the roof, public satisfaction went through the floor. And there's another year's worth of data, which isn't actually on this graph. But so if public satisfaction went from 33% to 70%, it's now at 21%. 1 in 5 people in this country are satisfied or very satisfied with the experience of health services. 4 in 5 are not. And of course, you know, there's graphs, there's numbers, there's data, but actually there's a lot of human stories behind this. And there will be many, many human stories that you all know, you all feel in your families, your acquaintances, your lives. And I remember very much when I was working at St Thomas's during the pandemic. Those of you know St Thomas's, you look opposite Parliament, I can see a couple of nods, people know it well. And you look down Westminster Bridge from my office. And I remember those Thursday nights when people gathered on the bridge and they clapped and there were fireworks and there were boats going down the river celebrating the NHS. Actually, when they realised that was a super spreader event, we stopped doing that. But for a moment, it was really genuinely moving. And within months, we were back to the image you see at the top there. That goodwill just dissipated in the most spectacular fashion. And so any of us who work in health services, many people around this room will work in hospitals or frontline health services. The loss of confidence, the collapse of morale has been quite spectacular. And nobody wants to be either experiencing, as patients, as relatives, or as frontline staff, the second image you see there. Corridor care normalised in this country would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. So Lord Darcy's report last year, which if you haven't read it, I highly commend it, and actually you just need to look at the graphs and it tells you the most stark version of the story I've been telling here. The NHS is in a critical condition. But he also said it doesn't need to be that way. Its vital signs are strong, by which he means the underpinning calibre of the people, the quality of our professions, our clinical professions, and crucially our science and technology gives us an opportunity to be so much more than we are now. However, I'm still on the downside before I come on the upside in this narrative arc. The stacked bar chart you see on the far right there tells you that 10% of the people pay 60% of the income tax. So if those people don't have confidence that when they or their relatives need the health service, they will withdraw consent for a taxation-funded service. And there is no evidence that changing the funding basis of the health service in this country would be beneficial. Changing the amount would be, but the way of raising that income, no evidence to support that. However, quite startling, the line graph, which was from the FT last year, showed that the proportion of out-of-pocket spend as a proportion of GDP, obviously not in absolute terms, in the UK is now converging with the US. And I don't think any of us ever thought we'd see that, where because people are so unable to rely on the safety net of the NHS, they are spending out of pocket in ways that are close to the level you see in the US. And that's not about being rich, that's about not being able to access health service when you need to. People who are well enough off will probably have insurance. This is people who don't have insurance and are having to pay out of pocket. So a real fraying of the social contract. And unlike in the 2000s where I showed you that bar chart and the economy came to the rescue, that's not clearly going to happen. We all know that. The economy is not in a position to just throw more money on more people at the same model of care that we previously had. So what this shows you here is, which we all know, the economy really has been pretty tepid since the world financial crisis, between 1% and 2% growth. And recent volatility because of the tariffs off again, on again, off again, on again. I can't actually keep track whether they're on or off, but what we know is that level of instability, uncertainty, does not help market confidence. And so projections have actually, across all those countries, have actually got worse, even though they weren't very good since the Trump pronouncements. Now, this is my one indulgence as a historian in a room full of scientists, which is actually if we look at public spending through the whole of early modern history until the present day, actually virtually the whole of history, there's only two reasons that the government actually raised money from the citizens. One was to fight wars, and the other was to pay the interest on the debt that had been accrued because of fighting wars. And that really was it. Until, of course, the massive change of the welfare state post-war, and then crucially, post-Cold War, we have been living in this peace dividend where the yellow there, that's defence, the yellow was incredibly low relative to other spending. So in fact, we now spend 5 times as much on health as we do on defence. We spend twice as much on health as we do on education. And clearly that peace dividend is over for reasons that are pretty obvious to all of us, and we heard about it in the Strategic Defence Review. So we will have to spend more of our national wealth on defence, and arguably if we spent more on education, it would probably deliver more health gain in the long run. So when people look at us as a health and care and life sciences sector, they want, I think, they see two big things, two big opportunities or warning lights. One is this incredible rise in the number of people who are not economically active. Over 9 million people in this country who are of working age but who are not economically active. And 3 million of those, it's to do with ill health, mainly long-term ill health, for the reasons you see there. For example, modifiable factors like obesity. And it's incredible how that's shot up since the pandemic. It was fairly steady for the last 15 years, in fact coming down slightly, and then shot up after the pandemic. And the other thing that people want from us as a sector is to convert our incredible academic strength in life sciences into better economic output. We do that quite well, but not as efficiently as we could, clearly. And I could have illustrated this in a number of ways, but what I've chosen to show you there is on the left-hand side, you see academic citations as one measure of academic output. And we're third only to America and China. And the other thing that's interesting about this graph is how, as a share, China has just been grabbing so much more of the share at America's cost. But the UK has actually held its share reasonably steady and third only to those two superpowers. However, in terms of translating that into foreign direct investment, we lag countries that we shouldn't really be lagging. And so we've got to get better at turning that knowledge into economic growth. And there are big markets to play for. You will all know this better than I, but over the next year or so, all of these markets, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, medtech, and clinical trials, are going to grow very substantially. And the UK, I would argue, needs to be competing for a greater share of this. I think we'll make these slides available, but if for whatever reason we don't, that's JP Morgan data if you want to get that. The references are all on there. So, a moment of critical challenges and opportunities. Healthcare demand outstripping supply. Significant burden of disease, modifiable factors in cancer and cardiovascular, and particularly driven by obesity. And an opportunity to better understand than we ever have before rare and inherited genetic disease, but still many more opportunities to treat that disease. So now I'm on the other part of the narrative arc. Now the hope comes in. So thank you for bearing with me, those that have stayed. And of course, the pace of innovation, as I heard in the last plenary, is extraordinary. This is, you could illustrate this in any number of ways, but the quickening pace of innovation across particularly digital technologies, biotechnologies is extraordinary. And I like this quote. I first used this quote when Justin Trudeau was more the man of the moment than perhaps he is today, but it's still a great quote. The pace of change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again. And we can illustrate that in AI. We could have illustrated it in many biotechnologies as well. So that's the Stanford AI Index, which has had the same prompts fed into it to produce an image of Harry Potter. And from the sort of slightly clumsy, GCSE student painting type thing you see in the top left, only less than 2 years, just over 18 months, separate that from the bottom right. Same prompts, but that's the model learning and getting better and better in that time. And there are, across multiple categories, particularly around image generation, we see AI now outperforming humans, and the only place we don't see it outperforming humans on that Stanford model is multimodal understanding of reasoning, but even there it's catching up fast. And this is an example of how this is used in healthcare. The grey shading shows you the volume of patients. This is a number of American hospitals. This is published data which you can, if your smartphone will pick up the reference, you can get the reference. So a stable algorithm that was used to identify sepsis in a group of American hospitals. The patient group was relatively stable. The performance of the algorithm was stable. And then COVID hit, and the mix of patients changed completely, and the algorithm was completely unable to differentiate COVID from sepsis. So it just goes to show that even reliable, predictable algorithms become unreliable or unpredictable when the data fed into them from those patients changes. Now again, obesity, if we look at this in historical perspective, it's extraordinary that through the entire history of humankind, the problem has been scarcity and malnutrition in most places, most of the time. That's the problem we've been trying to solve. And we've now, within the space of a generation and a half or so, completely flipped the problem, at least in the developed world, to be overnutrition or overnutrition of the wrong calories and lack of exercise, causing this huge burden of disease. This is cause of death directly or attributable to obesity-related conditions in the UK, but you could do this, of course, across America and many other developed countries. But even more suddenly, I know it's not sudden to the people who've been involved in drug development, who've been doing it for years, but in historical terms, it is sudden. We've found a way of solving this problem with the GLP-1 agonists. And where we found that problem, where we've solved that problem, the countries that have accrued the economic dividend because they've been supporting the drug development have had a massive boost to their economy. This is the Danish economy that's grown so rapidly on the back of Novo Nordisk's success. There are, of course, so many issues, many problems to contend with in these drugs. And if you were listening to the Today programme this morning, if you were really bright and early listening to the Today programme this morning, you'll have heard my colleague Alison Cave talking about the problem now of these drugs being used so widely and in unregulated ways that we're now having to warn people not to use them in pregnancy where there isn't data on the safety, not to buy them from their gym or their beautician or whoever else is selling them. So both a massive opportunity, but also many, many problems to contend with. And of course, the macro one, not only do we not understand all of the long-term effects, but we don't know how we're going to pay for this. But then if you read the Tony Blair Institute report last week, we'll say, well, how are we going to afford not to pay for it because of the impact on the population of obesity? Cancer, another one that I wanted to pick out. We know, of course, that the number of cancer deaths is going up and will nearly double in a generation from where we are now. But we now have the next generation treatments of mRNA vaccines, and the graph there on the right-hand side, as you look at it, the black line is showing you recurrence-free survival for patients who had melanoma, and the red line is showing you the same standard of care plus mRNA vaccines. So that is the additional effect purely of mRNA vaccines. Much more healthy life available. But again, how are we going to pay for it? Now, this is my favourite slide in the deck, and I'm going to come on to what I think the role of regulation is shortly. And this is, of course, one of the treatments, one of the new gene therapies for, in this case, spinal muscular atrophy, Zolgensma from Novartis. And the reason I like this one is I was sitting in one of my former hospitals, the Evelina London, yesterday, talking with the colleagues who were able to give this treatment to young patients. And this is a devastating disease, some of you will know it, I'm sure, where most young children with this disease don't live beyond their second birthday. More than 90%, if you have this, more than 90% chance you won't live beyond your second birthday. Gradual loss of muscle, and then you die young. And we now have this scientific miracle, really. And the reason I picked this one out is with my colleagues in the Evelina who gave this treatment to young patients. We've now had 63 patients treated in that hospital. And this is really giving hope. If this isn't hope, I don't know what is. This is giving hope where previously, for the whole of history, there was no hope. Now there is, that these young children can have lives, that their families can enjoy having them around. And from my point of view as a health service leader, the hope is much broader than that. Because the hope that it gives to the 25,000 people who worked in my former organisation, who are having a pretty difficult time, those people who work in the NHS, the ripple effect of hope to the tens of thousands of healthcare workers who share in the halo effect of what we can now do for these young children, even if they weren't directly involved in this case, the morale boost, the halo effect for those 25,000 people when I was working there, of the fact that we can be part of delivering this scientific miracle that has been developed, of course, in labs and in trials by many people, I'm sure, or many people in this room have been involved in similar things. That is hope. So I feel very confident, actually, I feel very hopeful that with human ingenuity, the scientific and technological transformation of healthcare will happen. The question really is only where in the world and to what timescale. And from my particular perspective, and many in the room, what role will the UK play? Will it be a leader, as it has been in biomedical science in the past, or will it be a follower? And where and whose patients will benefit first, who will get early mover advantage, and who will accrue the economic benefit? And so what is the role of regulation within this system? And this is my final session. Now, as I'm sure everyone knows, the MHRA has had a very strong reputation through most of its history, but it has had a difficult last few years. That's no secret. And really it was hit with a triple whammy. And the triple whammy was Brexit, which of course affected many across our sector, but it really affected the MHRA because it was so intertwined with Europe. COVID was both the MHRA's finest hour and certainly my predecessor, June, her finest hour as well, and huge credit to her and the team for approving the vaccines in record time. So the finest hour, but at the same time, underneath the surface of the water, the bit of the iceberg we weren't then seeing was all the other non-COVID related work that was going up at the same time. So demand is going up, as you see on this graph. And an ill-advised decision from the previous government to cut the funding for the MHRA. So at the same time the demand was going up, the funnel through which that demand of work was shrinking. And so you saw a huge increase in demand, and I know a massive frustration from many, including, by the way, in the MHRA, about not being able to get through the work as quickly. But you will have all felt that demand. And to the credit of the team, they have now got on top of that. So the agency is now hitting all of its statutory targets. We've still got a bit further to go on our non-statutory scientific advice. But the yellow line shows you how the number of applications that were outside of that statutory target has absolutely been dealt with, and the green is the average waiting time. And it's really gratifying for people in the agency. I take no credit for this, by the way, but the people before me take the credit for this, for the validation from a couple of our key commentators, which is great for the team's morale to see that that's been recognised. So coming to nearly the end of my talk now, but I do want to pause on this slide because this really is how I see our role as a regulator in the system. And I want to focus on three major strategic imperatives and then three ways that we're going to deliver them. The first is our crucial role around safety of patients and public. So I want us to build a world-class, always-on, digitally enabled system for safety and surveillance. We have the yellow card system, we have a good start, but really in 2025 we should have a much more digitally sophisticated real-time way of assessing what's going on in the real world by scraping data from not just CPRD, but a bigger set of primary care, all of hospital data that we can get hold of, hospital prescribing, but also even consumer data. There are 1 million Google searches a day related to healthcare, and that should give us a signal about where should we be looking within the healthcare data for signals. That's an inherently good thing for patient and public safety, of course, but it also enables the second objective here, which is to accelerate access significantly to new medicines, new biotechnologies, new health technologies, knowing that we have that support of the real-world safety net to pick things up as they go through from market approval. And therefore, we can be more risk proportionate about what we let into patients, into markets, knowing we will pick things up that we may not have seen in trial data. And then crucially, to 10x innovation, 10x our contribution to UK life sciences and innovation as the thing that is going to bring the next generation of those treatments for the little girls we saw there, but also power economic growth. And I'm going to say that I think there's three things we've got to do to make that happen, the way we do it. Firstly, we've got to make the MHRA a great place to work again. In some ways it is. I've been blown away at the calibre of the people and their inherent motivation. But it's been a tough time. You saw in that graph, any organisation that's trying to deal with that is going to have a tough time. So we need to nurture talent, retain the best talent. We need to work in deep partnership right across the ecosystem with industry, the health service, academia, and all sectors of industry. And certainly to work with our international partners, because the number of products, medicines that are going to come to market, there is no way that any sovereign regulator can get their arms around all of those things together. We must rely on trusted networks of international reciprocity between regulators to be able to bring these things to market, more so than we do now. That is a direction shift I want to take. And one of the things I was talking to Wes Streeting about this morning when we were in Leeds together is a greater use of international reliance and recognition. But still, for the UK, to be a thought leader in novel technologies like AI and healthcare, like gene and cell therapy, so that we would both export our knowledge and we would import where necessary. And crucially, to do that with the patients and citizens who are affected. Risk proportionality, calibration of risk is both a scientific and technical judgment, but it's also very much a human and ethical judgment, which should be informed by the patients and the citizens who stand to benefit. And so these are the big issues we're wrestling with, which I won't go through in lots of detail, but I think they will have been the themes of your day today. Affordability, clearly. How do we make these new technologies affordable without completely losing equity in the process? How do we adapt to these complex technologies that are going to change post-market, particularly when they're driven by AI? How do we manage personalization so we're no longer looking at a single molecule for a large population? We're looking at very bespoke technologies in very small numbers of patients. And those patients will accept the risks because the prognosis often is so bad that they will be willing to tolerate those risks if we can deal with personalization. And prevention, of course, there are many things we're going to be doing in future which you discussed today, and I even heard in the last talk, that are not really curative of disease, they're preventative of disease or preventative of aging. And clearly, how do we as a regulator retain the expertise we need to deal with this incredibly complex landscape? So I would like to thank you for your patience at the end of a long day. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd also like to dedicate this talk and thank my colleagues at the Evelina for the story I told you earlier. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for a beautiful talk, really, and highlighting the potential vision and hope for the future as well. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. Please. Have we got any more microphones?
Sorry, Mel Walker. Thank you, Lawrence, for that lovely narrative arc. It was very enjoyable. Great way to cap off the day. You will have seen the announcement by the FDA about their sort of use of AI to, speed up productivity and reviews. I was just curious. I mean, obviously, there's been mixed opinions on that as well. I was just curious what your view was on that and what the MHRA was thinking about along those lines.
Yeah, does this still work? Yeah, I can answer. We will definitely be using AI across the regulatory life cycle to speed up the work we do. I will need to look in more detail about exactly what the FDA are doing. There are going to be limitations. There are certain things where we'll definitely need human eyes on decision making. But what I can tell you very approximately is that for our scientific assessors, they spend about half of their time actually applying their scientific judgment to their work, and about half of their time scraping data from different sources, getting the GMP certificate from that website, something else from this website. That's where agentic AI can serve that information up to them in a way that allows them to apply their human knowledge where it is, which, by the way, is much more rewarding for them. So I think we can use AI to speed those things up. Where I don't think we are yet is asking AI to make decisions that require human judgment. That will allow us then to free up the time of those scientific assessors to work with companies much earlier in the product life cycle to make it much more likely that they will have a successful outcome for their product. So we will be using AI. I can't necessarily say it's exactly how the FDA will be doing it, but there's a lot of opportunity.
So you've got the microphone there. And then
Thank you very much. So understandably, there seems to be an implicit assumption in much of what you said that healthcare explains a significant proportion of the variance in health. And I would argue that that may not be the case. Furthermore, if you're shifting more to prevention, the drivers that you described of ill health, for example, obesity, are actually more driven by social and political factors than they are by medical factors. So I'm interested in your take on the MHRA's role in moving more towards prevention, given that it should probably be social and political, not medical.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well proven, evidence-based, that the social determinants of health, healthcare provision accounts for a minority part of that, and certainly acute healthcare provision, a minority part of it. So we as a health system need to reorientate ourselves towards prevention, certainly, and you will have maybe picked up my comment that actually, if we were to spend more money on education, we would probably deal with we would probably get more health gain from educational spend than we would certainly from hospital-based spend. So at the whole of the health system needs to reorientate itself towards prevention. That's a complex equation of which regulation is only one part. Reimbursement is clearly an important part. The way we organise health systems is an important part. I don't think regulation is going to be the key to that by any means. I think that's a whole government policy thing, health and health policies and all those sorts of things. But I do think we need to play our part in helping think through where do we invest or where do we assess technologies that can add healthy years, which may not be curative of disease, but they may be adding healthy years. So, for example, getting more comfortable with looking at biomarkers to assess technologies, as again the FDA have done. So I think we will definitely play our role in that, but I don't think we could rely on regulation alone to drive a move to a more preventative health system.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the use of AI at the FDA. I'm familiar with that, Janet Woodcock. They use it for what you said, is to get the data together and organized in a way, but also the FDA reviewers spend a lot of time on documentation. I've always argued that that's an excessive amount of time, but so AI can help with that. I would hope in the future that we'll move away from documentation by all the assessors and just work with the data. Because what we're going to see is we're going to have AI prepare these submissions and submit them, and then we'll have AI pull the data out and provide tables, and then we'll have humans on either side trying to figure out what that means. So why do we need those intermediary steps? But I think AI will help a great deal because there's a great deal of busy work and administrative work that AI can really help with without substituting machine judgment for human judgment?
Thank you for a better answer to the question that I gave. But yeah.
So, yeah, why
A
don't
question here, Sally Chung from Ipsen. I feel really excited about your vision to look at MHRA to accelerate access, right? But there's two elements in order to make UK attractive, as well as to make patient access faster. One is about changing or improving the treatment pathway for patients, and the other one is to make it commercially viable for pharma. So my question is, what role do you see MHRA can play in that ecosystem to improve patient access?
Yeah, so we're talking about patient access and competitiveness of the UK as a destination for trials and manufacturing. So I think, again, slightly as I will refer back to the prevention point, I think regulation has a role to play, but I think that's a complex equation involving regulation, reimbursement, tax policy, the speed with which we're able to mobilise clinical trials. All of those things need to come together in a coherent way. And regulation certainly is a part of that. What I think has been the part of the problem in the past is, rather than looking at the whole equation, saying how do we make it attractive for pharma, for biotech, for medtech to come to the UK, develop their products on the data we have, the patient diversity we have a benign financial environment in terms of taxation incentives, know that they have a predictable route to market in a reasonable, in a quick, if not at least reasonably quick time frame, and that there is a clear reimbursement route at the end of it. And the problem we've had, I think, is we've had regulators working separate from HTA, working separately from taxation policy. Where I think this government needs to get to, and I will certainly be supporting them in doing that, is bringing all of those component parts together as a smooth, predictable route to access. As an example, but it's a small example, we've had a thing called the ILAP, the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway, and a similar thing in devices, IDAP, which is the D for devices. In a way, what that's trying to do is it's providing a concierge service for a small number of medicines or devices through the maze. And what I want us to do is straighten out the maze so that we don't need a concierge service, but we've got to start somewhere with a concierge service. And we will continue with that, ILAP and IDAP too. But the real win will be when that becomes the normal pathway, the straightened out pathway, rather than needing the concierge service. I really do believe, by the way, I should be clear, I'm a civil servant, I'm not a politician, but I really do believe this government is committed to trying to make all of that happen, which is why I left health services, which frankly I loved doing, so it wasn't easy to leave, because I think this government is on a mission to do that, and I think regulation will play an important part. And I can certainly commit to, when I talked about working in partnership, working in very close partnership with NICE as the HTA body, but also the other bits of the ecosystem in the UK to try and make that pathway smooth.
Okay, we've got 5 more questions.
Oh, gosh.
So short questions and short answers.
Quick one, Lawrence. Just thank you for your inspirational talk. You mentioned your 3 priorities, of which the first one was safety surveillance. But I'm wondering, why not efficacy surveillance? Why not looking at the performance of products in the real world in order to bring a little bit of a learning loop back into both regulation and HTA?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And actually, I'm going to change my slide. Yeah, you make a very good point. Safety and efficacy. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, Catherine Abel. I just wanted to ask, in the growing wild west of digital well-being tech, where do you think the regulator threshold should be? Because we've seen the new guidance is including non-clinical, subclinical groups, and and yet there are so many that we need something. If they're going to be, medical devices have got very specific things, but in mental health well-being, it's not quite the same as a medical device that tells you your blood pressure or regulates your heart rate or whatever it is.
Yeah, and you're from Wellcome.
I am not from
Wellcome.
In fact, I'm, I guess, here from the Mental Health Goals Programme, the government. So I'm a civil servant.
No, I misunderstood. And the reason I say that is because I was at a dinner a couple of weeks ago at Wellcome, with a whole bunch of digital innovators in mental health. And I have to say, I thought I can see what's going to happen here. The regulator turns up and gets sort of universally panned by all these digital innovators. I was very encouraged that wasn't the case, probably from both sides, because one of the things I did before I came here was I was helped to found a medtech venture fund investing in early stage technology, so I do get that world. But also, what I was encouraged by was what I think of as the responsible digital innovators actually want and embrace sensible, agile, proportionate regulation, because they don't want, in your phrase was the Wild West, they don't want the cowboys coming in and spoiling it for the responsible innovators, or they don't want the well poisoned by irresponsible innovators. So I think we need to find a tolerance for adaptive, innovative uses of these technologies, but one that retains the public trust with a sensible, agile regulatory framework. And I think mental health, you're quite right. There's so much direct-to-consumer.
It's increasing inequalities because people are just paying for stuff.
It is, and we are seeing more and more direct-to-consumer healthcare, whether in apps or indeed in medicines like the GLP-1 example I described, which both potentially increases inequality, but it also brings in a whole unregulated sphere of direct-to-consumer marketing.
Thank you, Lawrence. What are your hopes and fears for the recently announced HDRS? And what would you like it to sort of tackle first to align with your vision and mission?
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy. I think mainly hope, a lot more hope than fear, in the sense that the government has said, with Wellcome, we are putting a major investment into sorting out the data environment for research in this country, which is definitely a positive step. I think going to my point about safety and efficacy surveillance, thank you, I see this as a major opportunity there, because actually I think we would probably say in this country, compared to many other countries, our safety and efficacy, or our safety surveillance actually, is quite good. It's better than most places, but it could be an awful lot better. We rely on yellow card reporting, so we rely on clinicians to proactively report. And I'm not going to do the embarrassing thing of asking people to put their hands up, but I know the answer anyway, having worked with many, many clinicians and knowing that I was coming here, but before I came here, I spoke to a lot of clinicians about how often do you use the yellow card report? Not so often, it turns out. But also there's no feedback loop. So in anything, if you're going to put a report in and you don't get the feedback loop, you're clearly not going to do it as often another time. All of these things are possible now with technology, but we're not really harnessing them. We don't have direct access to hospital data, and that's one of my early priorities through this process is to use this sort of federated data opportunities to get hold of much more data on safety, on efficacy, because we should know a lot more about what's going on out there than we currently do, and we shouldn't be relying on hard-pressed professionals to fill in quite difficult manual forms. It should just come automatically from your hospital EPR. This looks like something you might want to report. Is that right? Yes, click a button and it's automatically populated. And only if there's a particular question for the clinician do you need to do anything. So that would be my hope. There are, of course, fears, but I can see Munir's wanting to hurry us up, so probably won't go into the fears too much more.
Yes, very quick one. Lawrence, great talk. So we talked a lot about prevention, and then, of course, a lot of the things we do see in clinical trials rely on very late-stage endpoints. What are we going to do for early disease interception? And whether, following on what Andy's question about health data, whether we can use those digital biomarkers, perhaps, as a way to project or guesstimate, perhaps, the trajectory of disease.
Yeah.
Can MHRA be more nimble in actually approving those or accepting those?
We will have to be. We will have to be. I mean, that is clearly a complex, detailed area that will need proper working through and guidance. But we clearly will have to be. We're already seeing other regulators being more nimble in that area. But I think what we'll find is that, going to this point about equity, I mean, the phrase I was using with some people this morning is we're going to need regulation to be able to move at the pace of innovation, because people will want to access these products rightly. And they will pay for them anyway. If we don't find ways, they will start paying for them anyway. I'm going to a forum, the Founders Forum on longevity next week. And I guarantee that the money will bring these things through to market. People will find ways of accessing these things. So as a regulator of a public service across the whole of the UK, we have to find ways of reconciling the ability of the market to bring forward products, of industry to bring forward products, the desire of people to access those products and willingness to pay for them, with the imperative to keep them safe, make sure that things are tested for safety and efficacy, and that we don't totally lose equity in the process. So in brief, we will definitely have to become more agile, more comfortable with how we do that over time.
Great. Last question.
Hi, Madhukar Bose from the Department for Business and Trade. Just quick question about the UK's attractiveness again on AI particularly in healthcare. Part of the issues have been around clarity of regulation in AI and also the capacity within the regulator to take products through the class 2 route, for example. How do you see that evolving and what can be done to improve it?
So this is definitely a watch this space type thing. And your DBT, so you probably haven't been too closely involved in this, but the health plan that's coming primarily through the health thing, you might have seen more of the life sciences sector delivery plan. So I think clearly there's a moment in time where the FDA, that has been something of a thought leader in this space, is clearly in, is clearly in, well, I won't say anything, it's obvious to all of us, it's in a difficult space at the moment. So I think I would very much hope that we continue to work with the FDA, but it's having a challenging time around some of these things. I hope I haven't put my foot in it, my colleague here. The EU, on the other hand, has been clearer where it stands, but arguably, well, certainly industry would say, it's not as pro-innovation as they would like, let me put it diplomatically. And I think there is a space for the UK working as a sovereign regulator in networks of trusted regulators, but to carve out a particular space for itself. And what I don't really think the UK should be doing is adding regulatory hurdles that are ultimately duplicative and non-value adding of things that have already got a trusted approval somewhere else. Where I think the UK should be differentiating itself is say, look, okay, if you've got CE marking, fine. But actually what we want to bring to the UK is a novel route for regulation. So CA marking is around things like AI as a medical device or novel devices, which is not value adding, but it is faster route to market. So I think we can play a role in the regulatory ecosystem that isn't pointlessly duplicative, but is value adding and is creating a route that other regulators can start to rely on, but also industry can rely on. That would, of course, capitalize on our strength as a country in AI. And I think that is very much the thrust of what I think, although I'm not here as a government spokesperson, but I think that's very much where the UK government is looking to go. And when the 10-year health plan comes out shortly, I think it's pretty clear it's going to make signals towards ambition for smoother adoption and uptake of AI with responsible regulation as an enabler.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I'm sure we could keep you for another hour, ask you questions and so on. Yeah, Andrew, fantastic, yeah. So thank you very much. So it's my role to close the conference for today. Guy is looking at me saying, finish, because the Science Museum is going to throw us out very soon. And the team also has to go and prepare for the evening event at the Natural History Museum. So I'm sure you'd agree that we've had a fantastic day. Really amazing panels, panelists and chairs. So, you know, it's been great continuing professional development for all of us, I think. So please join me in thanking the chairs and panelists, please. And of course, the two great keynote speakers as well. So again, thank you to both of you, Tony and Lawrence. A conference like this takes a lot of organizing, a lot of angst. I have lost a few hair strands since we started this. And the team from Pre-Gallion, you know, has been worked extremely hard, the AV team over there and so on. So please do thank them as well. And there are people from Morehouse who were fantastic in helping us, and they will have contacted many of you, Cora and Andreas. They're actually in Portugal for an away day for Morehouse, but Leo, who's their boss, is here, and so on. So the Morehouse team did a fantastic amount of work and so on, so we really do need to thank them as well. And there are other partners as well, Finn, Trinity, etc. So, please, they were also very important in developing this and in advertising and disseminating and so on about this particular conference. It's been a great day, but it wouldn't have been any good if you weren't here. So please, thank you very much for attending. If you are coming this evening, I look forward to seeing you this evening. If you're not, then please have a safe journey home and hope to see you next year. We already have a date for next year, and hope to see many of you next year. Thank you very much, everybody.